seedling by hand. He was in a different part of Yunnan province in China, and there were people that just grabbed handfuls of seedlings with some mud on the bottom of it, and they just went along and threw them like darts. And they planted themselves that way. And you know, he was thinking about how God plants in the soil of our lives, and said, well, you know, it all depends. It depends on soil conditions as to how farmers are going to plant, but it also depends on our conditions as to how God is going to plant in us. And that is the point that Jesus is making in the parable of the sower, that God is just going to be so profligate and so extensive in his throwing of seed that it's going to hit some people, all people, in very different ways. And the idea of the planting, of course, has to do with grace. All right? I don't want you to think of grace in your typical standard religion-y kind of fashion, okay? If you do that, you're going to miss the point, which is what happened to most of the people in Jesus' day. Grace is that which occurs in your life every single day. It is an invitation for you to see, to hear, and then to understand. And I mentioned last week and a couple of other points that the things that you should be noticing or can be noticing, because you are a human being with these things already built into you as part of God's grace. You should be looking at beauty, at truth, at justice, and at love. In those fashions, those are the places that you're most likely to be able to follow, to see the graciousness of God and the seeds that he has planted both in and around you in your daily living. Now, you'll note in the parable this morning, and if you didn't, I'm going to tell you, very simple. The word listen or hear is used 4 times. All right, you've all had conversations on both sides, I assume. I know I certainly have, where somebody will be talking to me and I won't be listening entirely. I'll be thinking about what I want to say. All right? Or I will be talking and somebody is obviously trying to listen, but they will be thinking about what they're going to say. That's not at all uncommon for any of us to have those kinds of conversations. So a lot of times the conversations go like this, and you wonder why there was, what do we call it? Oh, God, our communication. We need to get our communication better. We always say that, as if that really ultimately matters, because that's not the issue at all. It has to do with the gift that God has given us to hear that which is spoken to us, and also to understand it. Now, the word hearing is the Greek word is akuo, right? As in acumen, right? Alertness. And that is one of the gifts that you and I have been given. A raw gift that is sometimes utilized by us and sometimes not. The acuity and alertness and perception to hear what is being spoken. I got a call from one of our young ladies in the congregation who's been out in the workforce for a few years, and she was getting 30 to 32 hours a week at this job, you know, just underneath where you don't have to do medical insurance, right? All right, slime bags. Just an opinion that one. So on Fox or MSNBC, I'll offer my opinion anytime. I won't offer any news. I'll just offer my opinion. But very common and very typical, you know. But always for the last 2 years, the promise of full-time. Promise of full-time. Finally realizing after a new manager comes in, all of a sudden her hours go from 30 or 32 hours to, oopsie, not 40, 26. The question that she was posing was a question about justice. What's fair? She was using her Christian thinking. She was hearing the corporation properly and quite accurately. And now, of course, her dilemma as a Christian woman, young woman, is how shall she now live? Because the question that young people are asking, and it's different than people my age and many of your ages, 30, 35 and down, the question that is now being asked is, are we doing right things? Not are we doing things right. There's a huge difference, subtle but huge, and you know that as well as I do. In the world today, we're always being challenged to do things right. We're not challenged to do right things. I was talking to somebody, we were joking about it, who had just gotten a piece of furniture that they had to put together. And they had like 10 screws left over. I just said, wow, boy, that company is really generous, giving extra hardware. Really good. Yeah, well, the thing isn't really that stable, You just start over on that one. But, in the idea of justice and fairness, that's a really legitimate question to be asking, and it's the kind of question that is being asked by young people these days. Are we doing right things? Not are we doing things right? Yeah, the person I was talking to took the whole cabinet apart again and put it back together and ended up with, I think, just 1 or 2 screws left. But that was pretty good. It's a lot sturdier now. Okay, that's management. Are we doing things the right way? But are we doing the right things is what the parable of the sower and Jesus' graciousness, which you know through justice, love, beauty, and truth, poses, are we doing the right things? Jonathan Edwards, who was very much a fundamentalist preacher in colonial America, and I know, Marge, you love Jonathan Edwards. I know you do.
Yeah, we know that.
Yes, you do, for Bible study, that's right. He says this about the soil and the seeds. He says, when we study something, we learn about that thing. Even more, we are learning about the one who made that thing. And see, that's the other point of Jesus' parable, because he uses the word understand in this chapter 13, 6 different times. He uses it twice now. Well, he's got a front row seat. He's going to start crying shortly. Well, we'll just keep going. You can do both. This is called multitasking. I told you should have let him there. He uses the word understanding twice in this section of the parables, of which there are a bunch more in the next chapters. But the word understanding has to do with something which you do all the time, which my friend who was building the cabinet finally did. Putting it together. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Getting a magnifying glass out and studying the instructions so closely that you can see where that screw precisely goes. And that other doohickey. But that's why Jesus talked in parables. He was not doing it to make it so easy for people, because he was calling out the question and the invitation to live in the graciousness of God. And the only way that you can do that is by both hearing, that is by mental acuity, putting focus on it and time, and then beginning to put the pieces of the puzzle together in such a fashion that it makes sense to you, so that you can actually see the grace of God working in everyday life, in your life every single day. And that means at some point you're going to be always asking the question, are we doing right things? which is an ethical question and a grace question, as opposed to are we doing things the right way, which is a management question and is not an ethical question particularly. Now, the notion of understanding and perception in relation to beauty and truth and justice and love have much to do with the way in which you will or will not live your life as a Christian person, living in the graciousness of God. A lot of times we think of grace in terms of an academic sense of the word, when in fact it's not academic at all. The seeds that are sown do not always do well in some places. And I think Jesus' explanation is pretty apparent. You know, that you can be pulled and twisted in all kinds of directions. I was like, I do stupid stuff sometimes, and this, you know, but it's so typical. How many voices from how many different media outlets and social outlets are going to impact you on a daily basis? I turned on the TV and channel surfed Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, and headline news. I don't even know what to say about it. There wasn't any intelligent life there at all. I was like, oh my God, this is all opinion. And the opinion was not well grounded or well founded. It was just stupid. Again, not to make an observation, but yeah, there was nothing intelligent or well thought out in any of that stuff. It was the exact opposite of hearing and understanding. In none of those stations and none of those talking heads were seeking understanding. You don't find that in our political discourse anymore because people in politics are running for election as soon as they've been elected. And they are no longer in a position to hear the truth, to perceive it, to incorporate it, and therefore to understand the complexity of the pieces of the puzzle. Give you a simple example here. This is a no-brainer because they're not around so much anymore except in your garden where they sneak in. How many of you have ever heard of garlic mustard? Yes, you have it in your garden, I'm sure, and in your house. Yeah, garlic mustard is all around. It's imported from China. And it was imported because it was used as packing material because it really holds on to its moisture and doesn't lose its water much, and it's very good packing material. Well, somebody figured out it's garlic mustard. It's an herb. Well, from what I understand, it's not very good as an herb, and the flavor is sort of yucky. Not yucky, it's just bland is the word. Not yucky, bland. But somebody got the brainy idea to do that. And so it is now taking over on the East Coast and grows in clusters, and it's one of those weeds that you don't exactly know what it is, except that it's there, and it's soft, and it's all over the place, and you just got to pull it out as best you can. But it grows in clumps. Who would have thought? God's graciousness is all over the place, and He throws things all over the world, and it just grows. The other thing that you don't see anymore is the tree of heaven. Ailanthus. That was imported for the interstate highways, you know, on the overpasses and the steep banks and stuff like that. And people found that in China also. It grows in a more moderate way in China because of the climate. But it was a fast-growing, gorgeous, yellow flowering tree in the summer, and it lasts a long time. And so it was imported over here and was used for many, many years on the interstate highways at the intersections and stuff, and it was a gorgeous tree. Well, they found out eventually that it's not controllable in this country. It has no natural pests, it has no natural diseases, it has no natural anything, and it just grows everywhere. Oh yes, it's in your bushes, and it will eventually make an appearance above your bushes at some point. And it's just everywhere, and they finally had to get rid of it because I remember when I lived in Jersey City, we'd drive on Route 1 and 9, and it would be growing in the cracks and sticking out, and you know, you'd be running into it with your antenna, or a truck would be running into it with a mirror. But again, there is an appropriate use in the throwing of seed by us, and sometimes we do it well, and sometimes, remember our working definition of sin over the last few weeks, huh? Sometimes we screw things up. And just by virtue of being alive and breathing, we are sinful. We live under the law of sin, as St. Paul says, because, very simply, the opportunities and likelihood of you doing a wrong thing is just astronomical. It's a statistical probability that you will do a wrong thing on any given day. And that is the kind of thing that happens even in commerce. You know, nobody thought that it was going to be weeds in a tree that can't be controlled. But enough understanding and putting the complexity of the pieces together had not occurred. But again, that was a seeking for beauty in really yucky locations, interstate highways. So you're constantly weighing and measuring where you're seeing the grace of God at work in daily life. And that's why Jesus talked in parables, because he was inviting us to go into more depth to see the grace of God at work and to ask the really important question, are we doing right things? Not are we doing it the right way. That's important too. But that comes after asking and answering the question, are we doing right things? That, by the way, will be a generational difference. For all of us who are 40, 35, and over, we're going to be into management style, right? Are we doing things the right way here? Younger, growing up a very different way because we have impacted their lives, the young ones, in very different ways, where they have to ask the question, are we doing right things? Jesus' parable gets to the heart of that pretty nicely, I think. So sin is missing the mark. And our soil conditions of our lives and in our hearts do matter, so that we sort of prep our soil so that we can stay in touch with the graciousness of God. The one nice thing today, it's overcast. You know, it's also muggy, but at least you're not going to get a sunburn if you're out today. Grace of God. Yeah. This is a good thing. Now, what is good ground? And I'll be very brief on this. It's really easy. First thing is that you have an open mind. That is, that you're receptive to seeing and hearing what's going on around you. Second piece is that you're prepared to communicate by good listening skills. All right, that's something that takes time, and it's something that really takes focus. And you know that if you're listening to somebody closely who's making a closely reasoned argument or an explanation. I got a call late last night from a parent because her son had not gotten home at 11 o'clock, and he had the car. And I simply asked the question, okay, remember, truth, beauty, justice, and love. Do you trust your son? Did you do right things? Yeah, I trust him. I said, well then, you just wait. What else are you going to do? You can't call the police yet. You can't call the hospital yet. You wait. You trust your son? Yeah, I do. Well, they waited, and I got a call back an hour and a half later. He's home. Just thought I'd call and let you know. Yeah, I know. I would have been a little miffed if I hadn't gotten a call, even if it was late. You know? All right. Understand I was cranky when I got the call too, but on the other hand, I was happy to get it. But yeah, what happened? There had been an accident. and they had to take a detour, and he's sort of a newish driver, so he was going really slow on some of the back roads, getting home, and he had left the party a little late too, so you put the combinations together. But the upside is that he told them the truth. I left the party late. There was an accident, which they could verify. There were detours, which they could verify. So he told them the truth. All right, so even in that kind of circumstance where you worry, at the same time, out of that seed of worriment comes a moment of truth and trust and trustworthiness. You see how that grace thing works? But you got to pay attention to it. Otherwise, you'll just be an angry parent when your kid gets home late and just beat up on them and just pass on the message that you are not trustworthy. You can never have the car again, but you can have it tomorrow. Next message. You get the idea of what Jesus is doing with this parable. Inviting you to hear in particular ways by focusing and perceiving the world around you and how God works, and at the same time putting the complexities of the puzzle together. You will never get that on television, ever. You will never get that on the social media, ever. That's not their job. They are not truth tellers or justice seekers or lovers of humanity. And you must know that. They do not love beauty. You must know that. It is only you and I and our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who do see those qualities and gifts of God. That's what makes up grace. That's why Paul says that living in the law of sin will always lead to war and confusion, and following the flesh will lead to war and death and confusion. That's listening to media of any kind. They will always lie to you and never seek grace. It's not their job. It is, however, our job. So, you've been invited, as I have been invited by Jesus, to seek the graciousness of God and to point it out